do this practical once we understand the entire uh, the concepts and the mechanisms. And so have you gone through these all things, Salim? I don't remember because it's been a few days because of festival, right? Have
Frankly, not actually. I have been preparing
okay,
on
not a
VNS
problem.
and giving
Okay,
interviews, so
okay,
kind of
okay, great.
focus on that only.
Okay, fine, not a problem. So let us understand. Uh, we have already discussed about session affinity, sticky sessions, and session persistence, right? So we
Yes.
have understood the differences between these terms. Session affinity, always the request goes to the same server, all the subsequent requests. That is called session affinity. So in order to enable this session affinity, we need to enable the sticky sessions at the front end server, which is either a load balancer or a HTTP server. Enabling the sticky sessions in order to make this session affinity mechanism work. So why this session affinity is required? This is this reduces the performance overhead on overall, like, or if in a cluster, right? So high availability for clustering, actually by default the session replication occurs. So the session replication occurs in memory. So there is a concept called in memory. So let us take an example, like there are 4 servers in a cluster. There are 4 servers, and if one server fails, the other servers have to take over the sessions that were engaged with the failed server, so that the user should not get the error. So if a server fails, usually if it is a standalone server, I have established a connection with established a session, let us say Amazon. I have clicked on login and I have entered my username and password. At that time, if the standalone server in the Amazon's environment goes down, fails, so I will get immediately, I'll get error, 500 internal server error or whatever, right? If it is a cluster, and by default the session replication is enabled. So what is session replication? My session, by hitting this URL, I have established a session with a server. So my session data is stored in the server's JVM, and in that JVM there will be heap memory. So in that memory, my session will be stored. Not only my session, but also all the users, whoever has uh, established sessions with the server, all the session data, all the sessions will be stored in the memory of the JVM. If it is a standalone server, all the users will get the issue. They'll get the error if the server is failed when we were engaged with the server. If it is a cluster, by default there will be session replication. We know what is a replication. It is a duplicated copy of anything. So here, session replication, the all the users sessions data will be replicated to other server, and it will be shared across multiple cluster members within a cluster, right? So by default, when you create a server, a cluster, by default the session sharing, the user session data sharing will be enabled. So cluster uses which type of replication it is. Inbuilt, uh, it is in memory replication. So here what happens, all these four servers will share the session data. So that is why if one server fails, the other server will take over the session, and I will not get any error while accessing. Even if my session is engaged with a server and that server is failed, my session still will be executed or processed by the rest of the servers, any of the server, because my session data will be replicated in the backend to the other servers, right? So this is called failover, right? We know that this is failover. So with the help of session replication, we can achieve failover mechanism. What is a replication group? A replication group in WebLogic is a logical subset of WebLogic cluster that defines which servers replicate session data for high availability and failover. So it is primarily used for session replication in clustered WebLogic environments. By default, WebLogic performs in-memory session replication within a replication group. So there will be a default replication group if you don't create a custom replication group. So there is an option that you can decide which server can copy the copy its own sessions to which server. So you have the option of customization. By default, it will use a default replication group. Which one? The cluster that you have created. If you don't explicitly create a replication group for session replication, it will use a default in-memory session replication. So by default, in-memory session replication, it ensures that active server has a backup copy of the session on another server. So let us understand this. What does it mean? So what is the purpose session failover? When a server crashes or a server fails or it restarts. So it reduces replication overhead by limiting session backup to specific servers. So it reduces replication overhead by limiting session backup to specific servers. So what does it mean? So it means that one server is not going to replicate its session data with all the four servers. It will replicate the data to a specific server. So what does it do? It reduces the overhead of replication. So if this one replicates the session data with all the four servers, then again it's these servers also have to replicate the session data to all the servers. So one to one, one to many, sorry, one to many. Understood the concept, right? One to many. So in order to avoid that, the concept is very simple. If WebLogic has four servers in a cluster, it can be divided into two replication groups. So there is server A, B, C, D. So in a replication group 1, we can add two servers. One will be the primary and the other will be the backup server. So my session, if I am hitting the URL amazon.in, let us say my session is engaged with server A, which is primary. So all the subsequent requests. So what is the subsequent request? I am clicking on something. So this is something is added and this is my subsequent request. So if the session affinity is enabled, then my subsequent request goes to the same server. It will not go to server D because it is in a cluster. No, session affinity, it makes sure that the subsequent requests always go to the same server. So my session data is available in the primary server, which is server A. Now what does this server do in this replication group? It will create a session backup copy and it will store on server B, which is a backup server for session replication. All right. So in the same way, another group, we create another group and we will add C and server D. So C being the primary server and D being the backup server. So if C fails, D will take over, and if D fails, C will take over. So vice versa. So this is the concept of replication groups. So yeah, it is explained here. What does a replication group contain? So it contains a primary server, the server that handles the active user session. What does a backup server contain? The backup server that keeps a backup copy of the sessions. What is session data? What exactly the session replication contains? It contains the user sessions that need to be replicated to both the servers, meaning copied to both the servers. Replication policy defines how the replication occurs. So there are two types, synchronous and asynchronous. We will talk about this. And replication mode. So there are different methods in which you can replicate this user session data. So what are the different methods? You can either use the default one, which is in memory. For this, you don't need a third-party integration or configuration. You can use the server JVM's memory. And the second one is JDBC replication. So what is this JDBC replication? Database. For critical business applications where the requirement is something like, even if the server restarts, the session data should not be lost. So for this kind of requirement, the sessions are stored in the database, relational databases. So if the requirement is storing the data to survive the server restarts, then we will configure the JDBC session replication, which is called JDBC database replication. So for this, we will create a data source and we will configure it. We will target it to the cluster, so that all the servers in the cluster will use the same data source to store each server's session data into the database. And if one server fails, the other servers will get the session data from the database, not from the memory. So using this JDBC replication, there is one advantage, which is the memory will not consume more space for session replication. It will be faster. The execution will be faster. But one disadvantage is, compared to in-memory session replication, the database replication will be a bit slower. Why? Because the request has to obtain the database connection from the data sources connection pool, and it needs to establish connection with the database and get the data from the database, again release the connection pool back to the release the connection object back to the connection pool, and continue the execution in the JVM. So here there are few more components added, few more transactions added with the database, which is called database IO. That is getting an extra time allocated for itself. So yeah, and how do we decide whether the session should be replicated using in-memory or JDBC? There is one more thing here it is missing, that is file-based. So you can, it means that you can store it, store the session data on your disk also, on your disk also. So this is very slow, mostly used for, standalone servers. And one more component can be used, that is coherence replication. So we will talk about this coherence separately. First, we will try to understand these all things. So coherence, it is not only for session replication, but this coherence is used for uh, distributed caching. So what is distributed caching? Why it is used? In WebSphere, also there is a distributed caching mechanism that can be used to optimize the application server and application performance. How to optimize using the distributed caching? In WebSphere, it is called Dyna caching. All right. So we can use that not only for JSPs, servlets, method calls, EJBs, but also we can use it for some part of the response page, and we can also use it to cache some dynamic web pages as well. All right. So that concept is entirely different, but again, in order to process your JSP servlets and EJB calls, the user will anyhow will create a session with the server. So the session is directly linked with user data, application data, and servlets. So these all are resources, right? So that is accessed by the users. So for faster performance, we use this coherent